This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. John Anderson worked at Adventure International, where he coded several games, Eliminator, Rearguard, and Sea Dragon for the Apple II, then Rally Speedway and Arex for the Atari 8-Bit computers. This interview took place on May 22, 2019. In it, we discuss Scott Adams and Russ Wetmore, both of whom I have previously interviewed. Check the show notes for those links.
I went to University of South Florida for a degree in engineering, electrical engineering. And while I was in college, I really got into water skiing. So by the time I graduated, the biggest thing on my mind was, where am I going to move where I can water ski a lot? So I moved to Central Florida and Orlando area. And I actually took a job pushing paper with the telephone company. And after a while, I started playing video games at the bar across the street during lunch. And at the mall, I played Space Invaders and was really hooked on those coin-op games. So a friend of mine worked at Martin Marietta, and he had bought an Apple computer. And I had bought a Bally game computer because it had Space Invaders on it. And the thing, I bought it from Montgomery Ward's, and it would heat up and crash a lot. So I took it back and I went and got an Apple computer like my buddy had, and was, bought games for it and things like that. And after a while, I just started getting the idea that maybe I could just learn to program and write my own games. And one of the first things that I wrote was in BASIC, just a little thing that you could control yourself and fly around in a 3D environment using Bill Budge's 3D construction set. And when I got it running, it was like I could fly around in space, but it was super slow. So I got the idea that I needed to write an assembly language. So I taught myself how to write in 6502 assembler, and just kind of rewrote the control part and found out that it was still super slow because 3D on the Apple was super slow. So, but that got me going. And around that time, I guess I bought my computer in May of 1980. And I quit my job in November of 1981, because I was really into playing Defender, and I wanted to write Defender on the Apple. So I prototyped up, the scrolling landscape and the side-scrolling spaceship and things like that. And I sent a copy of the prototype out to Sierra before they were Sierra Online. And they offered me a job to fly out there and live in their programmer commune, But I just bought a house, and I like water skiing. I love being here in Florida. So I kind of said, yeah, that sounds really great, but no. And at a local computer shop, I showed my prototype of my game, the Defender prototype. And the guy's like, oh, well, the guy that owns this computer shop is a software publisher, Adventure International. And so that's when I got hooked up with Scott Adams and Adventure International. And we worked out a deal where I would get some salary and be paid royalties on my game. And that's how I got working with them. Unfortunately, the one kind of thing I regret, and I don't really regret it too much, was that Scott was like, at that time, there was some fear in the industry about being sued for copying arcade games that had popped up. And Scott wanted me to change the game and not make it Defender. And so I did, but I kind of regret doing that, but it doesn't, at this point, it doesn't matter, but it's not a big deal. And so I went on to use that sort of same side-scrolling technology for Defender in 3 different games at Adventure. Eliminator, which was the one that was supposed to be Defender, but ended up just being, a side scroller of no special significance about it. And then another game called Rearguard, and then a third one called Sea Dragon. They were all for the Apple. And Scott wanted to have the names across all the lines of the computer. So there was a Sea Dragon that was the original, was written by Wayne Westmoreland and Terry, makes me think of Monty Python, like Gillum or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I wrote my versions of the games, I just completely went with my own graphics and change up of the play style and stuff like that. So that's basically, those 3 Apple games were I did for Scott Adams Adventure International before I switched over to the Atari at that point.
So the Sea Dragon, I'm familiar with the Atari version only, but according to what I've read online, it was originally for the TRS-80. So did you look at that one and say, I'm going to do my own take on it, or how did that work?
Yes, exactly. That's what I did. Basically the game, the one game that I converted that was closest to the original was Arex in terms of gameplay. But the graphics was totally different, added music to it. And in that particular game, you had a bunch of random kind of walls in the game. And I didn't really play the original more than just enough to see it. So it was not a copy. Like the levels were not designed the same. Once I saw the gameplay and incorporated that, I just went off on my own. And I did the same thing with Rear Guard. Was a conversion from I can't remember, it was a color computer or something. So I basically just took the root concept of the game and then tried to make it mine at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the version of Sea Dragon for the Apple had digitized speech, correct?
That is correct. 1-bit digitized speech. I digitized it on the data port and was surprised that it worked.
Had you heard of that concept before, or did you come up with it on your own, or where did the idea come from?
I came up with it on my own. I just thought I'd try and see if 1 bit was enough to digitize speech, and it turned out that it was.
Barely.
Yeah, barely, but it kind of fit, with the whole idea of being in a submarine and the intercom and low quality sound, but it worked.
Sea Dragon! Good day, Captain. Your ship's computer is now ready. Please wait while I initialize systems. Approaching maximum damage.
That must have used a lot of your precious RAM and disk space.
Yeah, I don't really recall that using up that much space. Later on, I did Rally Speedway on the Atari, and to get it into a cartridge, I had to use compression. So, but when it came to Sea Dragon and the disc, I don't really remember it being too much of a problem at all. So.
Okay. So before we move on to the Atari stuff, I want to get back to Eliminator, your Defender, not Defender clone.
Yes.
You sound like you were ultimately not happy with it.
Oh yeah, I thought that it was supposed to be Defender, and and it turned, and the guys, Wayne, the TRS-80 guys, Wayne Westmoreland, they actually did Defender on the TRS-80, and and that's why I was like, well, dang, they did Defender, and I like bastardized my game, tore it apart, and didn't do it. So I think it was only a minor regret that I had, but I think I would have been happier if I had gone that route.
So were you an employee of Adventure International or a contractor?
I was an employee, so I got a salary, and I had I held the copyright to my game and got a royalty as well. So it was a reduced royalty from outside authors, but it worked out pretty well.
But you got to stay in Florida and keep on doing your outdoor activities and things.
Yeah, and my house was really close to the facility. And when Scott Adams closed the first facility because he built a dome, and the dome was like just like 2 or 3 blocks from my house. So it was very convenient for me to work there, and a lot of fun.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so you did Eliminator, Rearguard, Sea Dragon, and then how did you end up writing Atari games? How did you find the Atari computer? Tell me that story.
Well, it was pretty obvious at the time that the Atari was a much better game machine than the Apple. And I think Atari sales were, doing pretty good at Adventure International at the time. And I had a friend that we used to play auto racing on the Intellivision all night long. We're just crazy about playing that game, and we had so much fun. And I said, I'm writing this on the Atari, and that was, where I got the idea for Rally Speedway. It was from Intellivision. So, and it was much better suited for programming that kind of a game. I mean, the Atari was a game machine.
Sure. All right. So do you have to pitch the idea to Adventure International and get their okay, or did you just kind of go ahead and do it on spec, or how did that work?
I don't remember pitching the idea or any reluctance on Scott's part at all. I don't recall any of that. I just think I was like, I want to do this. And at the time, everybody seemed to be pretty stoked about, how it was coming and what it looked like and the whole idea. So yeah, I don't recall any resistance at all.
Okay.
Scott was pretty cool about just letting me do what I wanted to do. So.
How long did it take you? About?
That's a good question. I quit my job in November of '81, not knowing, exactly what I was going to do. And I think I started at Scott Adams around early '82. And I wrote the 3 Apple games, and then I worked on Rally Speedway in '83. And then after that, I did Arex. I'm thinking that Rally Speedway was probably about 6 months, maybe, to write, 4 to 6 months. That's okay. Just a rough guess.
Sure. And you are obviously already familiar with assembly language from working on it on the Apple II. Do you remember any particular issues learning the intricacies of it on the Atari, the differences for that machine?
Well, the Atari had a lot of graphics related hardware that was in there, and it was all pretty straightforward. So the manual was good. I still have that original, Atari reference manual, and plus there was like Russ Wetmore worked there, and we would talk. I think there was a lot, and Dan Bourne. There was a lot of just general chatter about the inner workings of the Atari. So it wasn't like I didn't have anybody to talk to about it. So seemed like fairly easy computer to program. I just kind of laugh how write all this stuff in assembly language and it never crashes, and nowadays people write in high level languages and computers freeze up and programs crash and all kinds of stuff. But that's what happens when you got a fancy operating system under the hood.
Right. Yeah. Well, with Rally Speedway, I mean, you went all out. It was a beautiful game, just very colorful, and you had designed a fancy font for it, and seems like you were having fun with it.
Oh yeah, that exactly. Like I said, I just loved auto racing on the Intellivision to death. So I had a great time writing that. And I remember we were down in Fort Myers. There was a guy, Sparky Starks. He was a programmer, and he explained Huffman encoding to me over a beer. And I went back and I used that to get Rally Speedway to fit on a cartridge. I think they were 16 megabytes or something like that. And I had to laugh because while a few years later, I don't remember.
You might mean 16K, but
Yeah, 16K, right, exactly. And then I remember years later, after the internet was there, I went and searching on Huffman and Coding and read explanations by, like professors or whatever, and I couldn't hardly understand it. I thought it was so funny how like this guy explained it to me, Sparky explained it to me over a beer, and I just took that knowledge back and put it right to work. So.
And that was the compression that let you
Yeah.
onto a little cart?
Yeah, it was definitely necessary to fit on that cartridge.
Nice. So how well did it sell?
It didn't make me rich, I got some income that came in, and that was comfortable at the time, but I didn't really nothing was like a big, huge, money maker. I didn't I didn't pay off my house or anything from any of those games. And but I had a lot of good times, a lot of good memories from, doing something you really love and enjoy. I mean, heck, I was doing this stuff for a year and a half on my own after work. So it had to be kind of fun. And but the whole video game industry just took a huge dump around the beginning of '84, somewhere around there. And that's when Scott and I decided to part our ways, because there was just not enough money in it. And it actually turned out that Russ Wetmore, he went, the author of Atari Sea Dragon and Preppy, he went his own way, and he got a contract with a company called Batteries Included.
Sure.
To write some home productivity software on the Atari. And then he subcontracted me to take his Atari code, which was written in Action, and port it over to the IBM PC Junior, and which I ported it over using C. The Desmond C compiler was available back then. So that was a little contract that I did for him after Adventure International, and then the next thing I did was go to work for a military simulator company and build a tank gunnery video game for the Army after that.
So the word processor for the PC Junior must have been Paperclip. That was what the Atari version was called anyway.
No, it was called something, I can't be sure. I think it was called Homeworks.
Homeworks. Okay.
Yeah. By Batteries Included. That may not be exactly accurate, but that's what I think the name was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were you aware that last year, or I guess 2 years ago now, some Atari folks hacked Rally Speedway to add new tracks to it?
Well, that's awesome. It has a track editor, so.
Oh, did it? Yeah. I guess they were. Okay. Well, okay. I just was researching it and found that people are excited about these new tracks. So,
well, maybe they hacked it so that the tracks are built into the mod when you run the emulator or something. Yeah,
that might be it.
Yeah. No, I think it's kind of cool. Every once in a blue moon, I'll go out and I'll Google to see if there's anything that anybody's doing. But I didn't see that particular thing. But I do see people running emulators, and surprisingly, still posting YouTube videos.
Yeah. You still have the source code to any of this stuff?
No, I don't. I guess actually that's kind of another regret, because I keep so much junk that, I'm surprised that I don't have the source code to it. Yeah. It's lost to wherever, unfortunately.
Yeah. It happens.
Yeah.
I like the part in Rally Speedway when you crash and then the little guy runs out of the car, he rolls out and he waves to say he's okay. Why'd you do that?
I don't remember. I think that one of the things that was always in my mind was graphically, you had to do something in the game, just to sort of, spice it up. And so the little guy, if you're going below a certain speed, he just jumps out and, I guess he waves. And if you're going above a certain speed, then he's on fire and he has to roll and put himself out. So yeah, that was just sort of a random thing. That I just came up with. I can't really attribute it to anybody or anything in particular.
And the settings in the games, the road conditions and the type of acceleration, did that come out of through playtesting, or this game's too hard, this game's too easy, or how did that come up?
Yeah, no, these were just ideas that I came up, be able to customize the game, how fast you want to go and how easy or hard it was. And yeah, I don't recall there being any kind of like testing and like tweaking or anything like that as far as, having a test audience give feedback or anything like that. Of course, everybody in the office was sort of play testing all the time. So it's possible that, that I'm not giving credit to certain people for ideas and things like that, but I just really don't remember who thought of what. I know that, the guy that did the voice in Sea Dragon, Paul Schaefer, he collaborated like on ideas a lot, but, I don't specifically remember, what ideas he had versus mine and so
Sure.
forth.
So why was the title of the game John Anderson's Rally Speedway?
Oh, good question. Yeah, the reason why, and I don't think Scott Adams really liked that. He was kind of like not for it, but I was pretty adamant. I was a big fan of the movie The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. And that's the title of the movie was John Carpenter's The Thing. And so I was like, I'm putting my name on my game. That's why it's called John Anderson's Rally Speedway, because of John Carpenter's The Thing. And
Interesting.
yeah, well, I must have watched that movie a million times.
I don't know if you were aware of it at the time, but I mean, there was kind of a thing about developers being anonymous. A lot of developers left Atari to form Activision and iMagic because they felt like they were just cogs in a machine. They didn't get credit, and so I didn't know if it had anything to do with that, but it was more of a movie thing, sounds like.
Yeah, I actually knew nothing about it, any of the other stuff. It was totally me just being caught up with John Carpenter's The Thing. And so that's how it became John Anderson's Rally Speedway.
Nice. Did you ever get any feedback from users, fan mail or anything like that?
No, not really any fan mail. I mean, yeah, most of the feedback that didn't really come until years later when I started seeing YouTube videos being posted and things like that. So that was kind of exciting, when that started happening, to think that people were still like interested, after all these years.
Sure. At the time, were you concerned about piracy?
No, I was a pirate myself, so it didn't bother me when people pirated my software.
Right, well, I pirated your software. I apologize.
Yeah, it was all fun. I mean, to me, it was just all for fun, and the money was not really all that important to me back then. So.
Yeah. All right. So after Rally Speedway, you did Arex.
Yes.
Tell me about that, and also you ported that one to the Commodore as well.
Right. That was a game written by William Muck, and I think it was the color computer, TRS color computer. He wrote it on, and I liked the gameplay. It was really neat, very straightforward and simple. Pieces move like a chessboard, a knight and a bishop, and those are your enemies. And basically, you sort of try to cover up as much ground as you can. I think what was the game that you used to do that with, like Kicks or Quicks? Or,
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know how to pronounce it either, but yes.
Right. Yeah, I used to try to cover up ground, and so that was the premise of this game. And to be honest, I can't remember if the gameplay was exactly like his game. There are certain things I can't remember, like when you stop and the tail burns up. I think it was in William Muck's game as well. So I think mostly what I did was enhance the graphics and add the music and just change some of the basics of the layout of the game and things like that, because I didn't really play his game, from beginning to end. I just played it enough to get the gameplay and then took off with it on my own. But I thought it was a pretty cool game. I liked it. Very straightforward, simple to play, but can be difficult at the same time.
Nice. So did you, aside from the Adventure International folks, did you meet anyone from Atari or any other folks from back that time?
No, I didn't actually. It wasn't until years later that I was working for a California company here in Florida, and a good friend of mine was the founder of the company, and he brought Nolan Bushnell out to the office in Florida one day. So that was basically the only person I ever met from Atari.
Do you still have your Atari machine?
No, I do not. I still got a couple Rally Speedway cartridges and some Arex discs, but yeah, no, I don't have it anymore. Right. I kind of got out of playing video games, when I got out of the industry, and and then when I had kids, I think I bought a Nintendo, and we played that for a while, and then in the latter 90s, I got back into playing on the PC. I loved online games like Age of Empires and Battlezone were my two favorites. And so I got into that for a while, and then after about 5 or 6 years, something came up in my life, and I stopped playing games, and I really haven't gotten back into it again yet. Played Xbox a little bit. I got a PS4. Actually, I bought it at the PlayStation store out in California. That a friend of mine out there is a hardware engineer for Sony PlayStation. So he brought me into the store, and I bought like the VR headset and PS4 and a bunch of Sony games and things. And I play with that every now and then, but I'm still not back to being a game guy, I would say, on a regular basis.
Okay. Well, if you ever get the itch, doing assembly language on an Atari emulator is so incredible compared to the way you must have been doing it back in the day.
Oh,
you don't have to wait quite so long for things to compile anymore.
So, yeah, I had a plug-in board that you plugged into the Atari that hooked up double density. Instead of using a serial interface, they would hook up like the parallel interface on the TRS-80, I think, similar to that, and that sped up the development. The compiling and stuff like that. It was much faster than the old Atari disk.
So you were doing the compiling on the Atari, but just using better drive hardware?
Yes, right. Yeah. And that really helped with the development. There's another guy there had bought that system, and then he wasn't really using it, so I offered him a little bit less than what he paid for it, and started using it, and it worked really well at the time.
Cool. What do you do today?
Today, I'm kind of into IoT development. I'm working on a chip that's called ESP32, made by Espressif, Chinese company. Very low cost, 240 megahertz dual core processor with built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And I'm working for a company in California called Leo as a consultant. And they're building basically software to help take care of like elderly people, like where you have sort of a network of friends and family that that their software will help keep track of whether they're up and moving around the house and things like that. And so it's basically just what I work on is just one little piece of the puzzle. It's just a small night light with infrared sensor, microphone, temperature sensor, accelerometers, and things like that in it, and colored LEDs, RGB LEDs, and it integrates with their backend software and their phone apps where you can control it. And that's kind of what I'm doing now, right before I hit retirement. Previous to that, I worked on embedded systems for video compression, streaming compressed video over networks, mainly used by Department of Transportations for taking video from cameras on the highway and sending it back to the traffic management center so they can monitor traffic. Did that for a while. Drivers for chips, did video for Windows drivers for an MPEG encoder that Digital Equipment Corporation made back in the 90s, and I've been dealing with compressed video since the early 90s mainly, but this most recent job though is a IoT kind of thing. It's pretty neat, and I enjoy doing that.
Cool. So what haven't I asked you about the Atari times that I should have?
Well, let's see. Well, I should give out a shout out to my friend Paul Schaefer. No, not the famous guy on on TV, but he was the voice in Sea Dragon. You know, he would walk around and say things in that radio announcer voice, like Don Pardo or something. So I'm like, okay, you need to be the voice for Sea Dragon. So that's one shout out I wanted to give to my friends. And yeah, I can't really think of anything else.
Okay.
Kudos to William Buck for writing Arex. That was a really cool game.
Yeah. All right. So I think this is my last question then. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I think it's great that you guys are having a blast with this, because I remember back in the 90s when I played Age of Empires and Battlezone Online. That was the most fun thing in my life. But then it's funny how like online gaming and everything gets more complicated, more sophisticated, and yet somehow it just still doesn't seem as fun, and when you're not into it, if you get into it, I guess it is. But it just goes to show that you can have a whole lot of fun with, less complex games like my friend and I did with Intellivision back then. It's probably hard for a lot of younger people today to relate with how complicated games are and how fancy they look versus how simplistic looking some of this stuff is from earlier days. That yes, it's still a blast and a lot of fun. And every now and then I look at my GameStop emails and I see they sell tabletop, sort of miniature console game or whatever, console games like
those tiny arcade games. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they got MAME or something in there. And every now and then I think to myself, maybe I'm just going to go down there and dump $300 or $400 and get one of those things. So yeah. So congratulations, guys, for basically finding something you really love and having a great time at it. That's wonderful, and it makes me feel good to see people still posting stuff on YouTube with something I wrote a long time ago. It's nice to know that you actually produce something that other people enjoy. That's an important thing.
Great answer. Thank you, John.
Well, I appreciate the interview, Kevin.